East China Sea, 7 April 1945. Dawn rose slowly through the mist, pale and uncertain. The sea was calm, a mirror of pewter, stretching to the horizon. Across it moved a shape so vast that the air seemed to tremble around her. Battleship Yamato, 72,000 tons of armor and pride gliding east at 20 knots. Her deck was slick with dew, her great pagoda mast looming through the fog like the tower of a drowned temple. Beneath that grey steel, 3 O-56 men moved quietly through their routines, engineers feeding boilers, gunners checking turrets, clerks typing final reports no one would ever read. They all knew the Yamato carried only enough fuel for a one-way voyage. Her destination was Okinawa, where she was to beach herself and fight as a stationary fortress against the American invasion. It was a plan born of desperation and obedience. On the bridge, Admiral Seiichi Ito stood motionless, binoculars lowered. The wind caught his coat, the scent of salt and oil rising from the sea. He had opposed this mission. He had lost. Now he would see it through with the calm of a man already dead. Behind him, Captain Kosaku Ariga moved among the officers, voice low but steady. "Discipline to the end," he said. "Let our last act be without shame." In the engine room, temperatures reached 120 degrees. Sweat poured from bare backs as stokers shoveled coal and watched steam gauges creep toward red. One sailor murmured, "This ship has a heartbeat." Another answered, "Then she knows it's her last." At 06:30, the sun broke through. The Yamato's guns glinted like wet stone. On deck, sailors turned toward the east and bowed a small gesture to the homeland they would never see again. Someone began to hum a folk tune from Kyushu. Others joined softly, a chorus that drifted across the water and vanished into wind. The escorts followed close behind light cruiser Yahagi and 8 destroyers dwarfed by the giant at their center. The task force left a trail of foam and inevitability. Far to the south, unseen American radar screens began to flicker. The hunters had found their prey. But for this 1 hour before the storm, there was still peace. The sea was flawless, the ship magnificent, and every man aboard knew that beauty was the last mercy they would be given. It was not a voyage to victory, a survivor would later write. It was a voyage to oblivion, the final prayer of steel before the age of the sky. The morning mist thinned to a white horizon. From the bridge of the Yamato, the sea looked empty, too empty. Admiral Ito studied his chart. To the south, beyond the curved line of the earth, lay Okinawa, now a volcano of American fire. To the north, home. But there would be no return. At 800 hours, the radio man brought a message from the Yahagi. "Fuel at half. Request confirmation one-way course." Ito's answer was short. "Proceed. Destiny cannot be refueled." The officers on the bridge looked outward, faces unreadable. They all understood what one-way meant. Yet none faltered. They were sailors of the old Navy, trained to follow orders as absolute as gravity. Captain Ariga walked the deck, greeting men by name. He reminded them to eat, to tie life jackets properly, to keep the guns clean. "A clean weapon is a clear heart," he said. In the gunnery tower, Lieutenant Nakamura inspected the 18-inch turrets. Each shell weighed more than a truck. He stroked the steel like an old friend. "You'll speak loud today," he whispered. At 09:30, radio intercepts confirmed what the Americans already knew. Large Japanese force bearing 200 degrees moving north at high speed. At that moment, 250 miles away, Task Force 58 came alive. On the flight decks of the carriers, Essex, Bunker Hill and Hancock, hundreds of planes began to roll forward. Avengers, Hellcats, Helldivers. Their wings shimmered in sunlight. Engines roared like 1,000 hammers. The air was filled with the scent of fuel and inevitability. Target Yamato came the briefing. Hit her hard, hit her fast, don't linger. By 10:00 a.m., the sky above the Japanese task force began to hum. Lookouts on the Yamato raised binoculars. tiny dots appeared in the distance like dust motes on the sun. Enemy aircraft bearing 090 general quarters sounded. Klaxons wailed through the ship. Men sprinted to battle stations. Ammunition hoists clanked, watertight doors slammed shut. The air thickened with oil sweat and fear. At 10:25, the first American planes dove. The Yamato's gunners opened fire with everything they had. Tracer lines of red and gold laced the sky. The ship shook as her anti-aircraft batteries thundered, filling the air with a storm of iron. From a distance, it looked like fireworks over a funeral. The first bombs missed geysers rising high as mountains. Then one struck the forward deck, tearing a crater the size of a house. Men vanished in the blast. Water and smoke poured through ruptured vents. Ariga clung to a railing, shouting orders through the chaos. Flood control, keep firing, don't stop! The gunners obeyed. Their hands blistered, their ears bled from concussion, but the sky kept coming wave after wave. By noon, the battle had turned from fight to endurance. The sea boiled with torpedoes and shrapnel. The Yamato's escorts burned around her Asashimo Yahagi, and the destroyers sinking one by one, their crews waving from flames. Through smoke and blood, the Yamato kept her course. She fired her main guns, once 3 salvos, that hurled 18-inch shells into the void. No one saw where they landed. Above, the sun vanished behind clouds of fire and fuel. The ship that had once been the symbol of invincibility was now alone, surrounded by an ocean that belonged to the sky. And still, she did not stop. To understand why the Yamato was doomed, you must understand what she was meant to be. When she was laid down in 1937, she represented more than metal. She was an answer to humiliation, the Washington Naval Treaty, the Western world's limits on Japan's pride. Her architects swore no foreign ship would ever outgun her, and they succeeded. At 72,000 tons, armed with 9 18.1-inch guns, and armoured so thick she could have shattered any opponent, Yamato was the largest and most powerful warship ever built. She could fire a shell heavier than a small car over 25 miles. She was in every sense the physical embodiment of the imperial dream, unyielding, perfect, invincible. But by the time she left port for her final mission, that dream was already extinct. The world had changed faster than her steel could cool. Air power had rewritten the laws of naval war. At Pearl Harbor, at Coral Sea, at Midway, carriers had rendered surface giants obsolete. Altitude had replaced armor. The Yamato's 18-inch guns could reach the horizon, but the sky had no horizon. The mission, called Operation 10 Go, was born of desperation. The plan was simple and hopeless. Sail the Yamato and her escorts, south beach her on Okinawa, and use her as a stationary fortress to repel the American invasion. She carried enough fuel for one-way travel. Admiral Seiichi Ito protested. He argued that without air cover, the ship would be destroyed long before reaching Okinawa. But the High Command wanted symbolism, not victory. The Yamato would die for the Emperor, and the nation would see her death as beauty. It was feudal logic disguised as strategy. US intelligence had already broken Japanese codes. American patrol aircraft shadowed the Yamato from the moment she left port. Her position, course and fate were plotted in ink hours before the first bomb fell. By the time the Yamato's lookouts spotted the American planes, the battle was already decided, not in courage or tactics, but in equations of range and altitude. The age of the battleship had ended years before. This was its funeral procession. Yet the Yamato's death was not meaningless. It marked the final line of transition from the visible to the invisible, from steel jewels to radar screens. The Pacific War had become a contest of technology, information, and reach. In that sense, her loss was not just Japan's. It was the end of an era, the moment when the romance of the sea gave way to the cold geometry of the sky. The men aboard her would pay for that lesson with their lives. Admiral Seiichi Ito had always been a reluctant warrior. He was 58, thin, almost scholarly, more philosopher than fighter. In another life, he might have been a teacher. Yet now he commanded the greatest warship ever built on a voyage that reason could not justify. Before sailing, he had gone to the Imperial Navy Ministry and argued against Operation 10 Go. To waste this ship, he said quietly, is to waste the last heart of the nation. The admirals in Tokyo bowed. The order stood. When he returned to Yamato, he looked at her immense hull and said to a staff officer, "So be it, we will die well." He carried no delusion of victory, only the belief that example still mattered when all else was lost. His eyes, one aide remembered, had already seen the end. Captain Kosaku Ariga was the opposite, young in spirit, devout, fiercely loyal to his crew. He walked the decks each morning, saluting each gun mount, checking the kitchens, speaking softly to stokers and gunners alike. Discipline, he said, is not about obedience. It is about respect for those who stand beside you. On the morning of April 7th, he wrote his final letter to his wife. "When the cherry blossoms fall, think of me. I will go with them as all things beautiful must." He sealed it, handed it to a messenger bound for Tokyo, and went to the bridge. He wore his best uniform. In the lower decks, ordinary sailors prepared in silence. Signalman Harada, 19 years old, tucked a photograph of his mother into his cap. "She said the sea would protect me," he murmured. Maybe she meant the other sea. The gunnery officer, Lieutenant Nakamura, polished the barrel of the forward turret with his sleeve. If the ship must die, he told his crew, let her speak one last time. In the galley, cooks distributed rice balls and tea, their last meal together. Some men laughed too loudly, others stared into nothing. Above them, the ship's great engines rumbled like distant thunder. At 1100 hours, Ariga gathered his officers on the bridge. When the time comes, he said, "Do not think of death. Think of precision. A clean shot, a straight command. These are our prayers." Admiral Ito simply nodded. "We will not shame the sea." Outside, the sound of approaching aircraft began to grow, a dull vibration rolling down from the sky. The men of the Yamato looked upward. Some clenched fists, some whispered names. A few smiled. They were not fanatics. They were men who had run out of time. The dawn they had seen that morning would be their last, and yet to the very end they believed there was dignity in how one met the inevitable. Below the decks, one sailor wrote in his logbook, "We have no future, but we have this moment, and that will be enough." April 7th, 1945, East China Sea. Noon came shrouded in haze. The wind carried the low hum of distant engines, at first a vibration in the steel, then a roar. Lookouts shouted from the mast. Enemy aircraft approaching hundreds, coming in fast. Alarms screamed. The Yamato's klaxons wailed 3 times general quarters. Inside, the massive ship chaos turned into choreography. Men leapt to stations. Watertight doors slammed. Ammunition belts rattled up elevators. From the bridge, Captain Ariga gave his last calm command. All batteries open fire. The sea erupted in thunder. 150 anti-aircraft guns roared as one sending shells into the clouds. The air around the ship became a storm of tracer fire, red, gold and white weaving, like fireflies gone mad. The great 18-inch guns, useless against the swift attackers, boomed once anyway, out of pride, not practicality. Their shock waves rolled across the sea like distant earthquakes. The first dive bombers struck at 12:37 p.m. Bombs hit forward near the bridge, exploding through decks. Men and steel vanished together. Smoke poured through shattered ventilation shafts. The Yamato staggered but did not slow. Damage control to forward turret fire spreading. Below deck, sailors drowned in corridors filling with oil and seawater. Others fought the fires with rags and buckets, coughing through smoke so thick they couldn't see the man beside them. Torpedo bombers circled low Avengers and Helldivers in disciplined formation. They came from every angle, attacking in groups of 3. One wave to distract, another to kill. At 13 Hurus, 3 torpedoes struck the port side. The ship shuddered violently. Power flickered. The deck tilted 5 degrees. The sound of men shouting mixed with the groan of torn steel. Admiral Ito watched from the bridge, unflinching. "We will not abandon ship," he said. "We die with her." Captain Ariga tied his cap firmly beneath his chin. "Signal all guns keep firing until we can't." The sky was a furnace now. Bombs rained continuously, turning the sea around the Yamato into boiling foam. Destroyers nearby burned or exploded one by one. Yahagi ripped in half, Asashimo vanishing in smoke. At 13:30, another torpedo hit amidships. The ship rolled to port again, 10 degrees, then 15. Water rushed in through ruptures. Pumps failed. The electrical grid died. The bow dipped. The guns fell silent. The Yamato was no longer a battleship. She was a burning island of iron. On the lower decks, a gunner looked up and whispered, "Mother, I am coming home." At 14:20, Admiral Ito turned to his staff. "All who wish to leave may do so." No one moved. He bowed his head, clasped his hands behind his back, and closed his eyes as another bomb tore through the bridge. Captain Ariga gave his final order, "Engine room, prepare to scuttle." He remained at his post, one hand on the railing, his uniform black with soot. At 14:23, a final torpedo slammed into the port magazine. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the sea became light. The explosion tore the Yamato apart. A fireball rose 6,000 feet into the air, bright enough to cast shadows on clouds. The sound reached American pilots 20 miles away, a single colossal thunderclap that marked the end of the age of steel. When the smoke cleared, only burning oil and floating debris remained. Of the 3056 men who had sailed barely 269 survived. Far above, one American pilot radioed back to his carrier, "Target destroyed. The big one's gone." He didn't know he had just witnessed the death of an empire's soul. The explosion that ended the Yamato was seen 200 miles away. For half a minute, the ocean itself turned white and then dark again, as though the sky had exhaled and forgotten what it was grieving for. When the smoke cleared, only wreckage remained, burning fuel, drifting woodmen clinging to planks black with oil. The sea rolled them gently, almost kindly. Rescue never came for most. The American planes circled, once saw survivors waving and flew on. War had no room for mercy that day. Hours later, the first destroyers of the Japanese escort picked up what few they could. Out of more than 3,000 aboard the Yamato, only 269 were found alive. Most were burned or half mad with salt and grief. One petty officer, Masao Sasaki, later said, "When I looked back, the sea was still burning. I thought perhaps the sun had fallen into the water." The US Navy recorded the engagement simply, "Battleship Yamato sunk by air attack, 7 April 1945. But for Japan, it was the death of the Samurai Sea, the final act of a tradition that stretched from wooden ships to floating fortresses of steel. The Yamato was meant to embody Japan's invincibility. Instead, she became its epitaph. Her destruction was so total, so absolute, that even the Empire could no longer pretend victory was possible. In that moment, the Imperial Navy ceased to exist. After the war, divers would locate the wreck split in two, resting 200 feet below the waves. Her turrets were gone, her hull bent and silent. They named the site Yamato Ridge. For the survivors, memory became a kind of exile. They lived ordinary lives, raised children, grew old. But each April, they returned to the sea in dreams. They remembered the hum of the engines, the smell of oil and sakura petals falling from the deck before dawn. Japan, too, remembered not with pride, but with sorrow. The Yamato became a symbol not of war, but of futility of beauty, sacrificed to obedience. A monument was built at Tokuyama, where she had once rested in port. It bears a single inscription: "Rest in peace, brave men. The sea keeps your secret." In the years that followed, air power ruled every navy on Earth. Carriers replaced dreadnoughts. Computers replaced binoculars. The age of the warrior ship was over. But sometimes when dawn falls grey over the East China Sea, fishermen still say they see her shape beneath the waves, vast, patient and at peace. The Yamato may have died in fire, but in death, she found what she was denied in life: silence. The Yamato was never meant to win. She was built to believe, to carry the weight of a nation's pride across a sea already lost. They called her the spirit of Japan, the last fortress of the samurai. But spirits cannot fight machinery. When she met the sky, she met the future, and the future did not bow. In her death, something greater than a battleship sank. It was the illusion that courage alone could resist change. Admiral Ito and Captain Ariga knew this. That is why they stayed aboard, not to die for the Emperor, but to prove that even in futility there is grace. The sea took them all and kept its promise of silence. No victory, no defeat, only the echo of men who did their duty to the very edge of reason. History will always remember the bombers, the carriers, the machines that won. But sometimes it is the losing side that defines the meaning of glory. The Yamato died because she belonged to a world that had already passed a world of honor, steel, and faith. And when her great heart broke beneath the waves, the ocean itself seemed to bow not in triumph, but in respect.